Welcome to the Global Discussion, a discussion with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins. Today, really delighted to have Roger Spitz here on the show. You're very welcome to the Global Discussion. Let's begin, though, Roger, asking you maybe to introduce yourself a little bit. Tell our international audience a little bit about your background, your career progressions, and maybe bring us up to speed with what you're involved in today. So, Roger, you're very welcome. Over to you, my friend.
That's great, Simon. Really a delight to be on the Global Discussion podcast with you. And so I'm Roger Spitz. I'm born in South Africa. I'm currently living in San Francisco, and most of my professional career is spent in London. Like many people in sort of hubs or whatever you call them, like London and New York, I spent a lot of my career and started in investment banking. So I was global head of mergers and acquisitions, covering technology for one of the global banks and focusing on advising, I guess C-suite investors and shareholders, and the boards on their various acquisitions and divestments. And after some time, especially when I reached San Francisco and was here to reinvigorate their business in 2017, I kind of promised myself to go down the rabbit hole around topics around change, disruption, complexity. Long story short, that's when I decided to move to effectively Foresight, how to sort of future prepare and make sense of our complex world. I do that through various hats. One is Tech Essential, which is technology and existential, which is a strategic foresight practice, so it's advisory. On the educational front, Disruptive Futures Institute publishes books. We give executive education talks. So it's really kind of education. How do you make sense of this complex, unpredictable world? How do you prepare for it? What frameworks to use? So that's very much educational content. Currently primarily focused on B2B and businesses globally. I sit on a few boards. We can talk about that, from climate to AI. I'm also have a foot on the venture capital side, but not executive. I try to spend less than 10% of my time on those side of things. And I also spend time with various organizations which kind of are self-reinforcing in terms of the themes of future preparedness, which I kind of focus on, one of which is the World Economic Forum, where I'm part of the Global Foresight Network.
That is a lot, Roger. There's a lot going on
I'm
there, my
sorry.
friend. There is a great career trajectory, though, because you worked at a very well-known financial institution in the banking and finance industry, and you were there probably just under about 20 odd years, I think, if I'm right.
Mm-hmm.
And you must have seen an awful lot of change over those years. And of course, we've seen big financial institutions come and go, and we've seen some absolute giants being created. We've got new players in that space today. But I was interested when you were telling us a little bit about your background and your career, how you kind of made that almost escape plan to sort of move on to new things. What do you think was driving it at that time? Was that just a personal decision that you'd done your time in that, or you just had this, interest in doing something else a little bit different? What was actually driving that passion, Roger?
That's a great question. There are a number of things, like often is the case, right? So I think one is I had, as you say, spent kind of 2 decades in the industry, and I kind of thought, okay, how much more am I learning? Is that what I want to do for the rest of my life? And things can change either because you choose to do something else or someone else has other plans for you. So um, all in all, I was also observing the nature of change was changing. So not to be too gimmicky or to play with words, when I had the opportunity of moving from London to San Francisco in 2017, I promised myself, as I mentioned earlier, that I'd go down the rabbit hole of trying to understand better what was changing. And at a very simplistic level, I was fortunate enough to be fortunate or not, but I happened to be advising, people who are kind of very much in the decision-making strategic sphere of things. And I just felt that what was keeping people up at night, organizations, wasn't the normal market pressures or competition or playbooks or strategies or buy market share or move to that country. I felt, and M&A is quite strategic. And I just felt that the nature of change was changing. And I went down that rabbit hole, literally. Initially, yes, I was always interested in seeing if I could do something else, if I would enjoy something else, if I had the magic idea in Silicon Valley. But ultimately, I didn't. And I just felt that by exploring different ecosystems and ideas, at the worst case scenario, I'd be a bit more knowledgeable. But actually, it led me onto pathways that I found more relevant for me to pursue a second kind of wind to a career. And that was a kind of combination of, systems thinking, complexity, futures thinking, foresight, understanding better innovation, understanding better emerging technologies, and all of the above somehow gave me a conviction that the assumptions we were making about the world being stable, linear, and predictable was not only wrong, which is fine. I mean, we have a Newtonian mechanical simplification of the world, which makes sense in a lot of respects, but that assumption of a linear, predictable, stable, controllable world was actually becoming more costly. To rely on that assumption was an increasingly dangerous and risky thing, whether it was for society, for companies, or countries. And so I kind of got confidence and got a hunch that that was an interesting area for me to professionalize and explore full time, literally professionalizing as a professional futurist, a foresight strategist, and started writing books. And effectively took the crazy or wise decision to move from investment banking and to do that full time. Maybe one point of serendipity, which is always interesting, right? Because the best laid plans, as we know. I decided to do that a little bit before the pandemic, and those were esoteric topics. When you think about decision making and deep uncertainty, it's. I mean, I wasn't the only one thinking about it, but it wasn't kind of the convention. When the pandemic hit, and then everything that subsided subsequent to the pandemic, suddenly appreciating the complexity, nonlinearity, unpredictability, deep uncertainty of the world were no longer so alien, and actually somehow it gave me more confidence and a lot more interest and visibility in my work. And so it was actually the demand side that kind of made me spend time and develop various things in relation to that, because they were topical areas of high relevance.
Yeah, fascinating. And I want to ask you just a personal question, if I can, about the type of work, the environment, and maybe the pressures that go along with that, because you weren't just working in it for almost 2 decades. You were at the heart of innovation, really. When it comes to what's going on in San Francisco and around the Bay, Silicon Valley, I know today you still sit on a number of advisory boards. You're still involved in venture capital. But what was that environment like for people that haven't maybe experienced that? Because on one hand, it sounds very glamorous. On the other hand, there's an awful lot of work and pressure involved in that environment. Am I right in saying that, Roger?
Yeah, listen, without a doubt. I mean, I think today most people and most environments and jobs and the context is challenging. So I think we all have our fair share of pressures of different sorts. M&A on one hand, you can either look at it and sort of say my diamond shoes are too tight or my caviar's too salty, and then a lot of the world will sort of think you're being a little bit, yeah, it's tough, but these are decently paid jobs, and it's a privilege to do them. It doesn't mean they aren't hard. So the pressures, if you're asking, and again, once again, for the many privileges that go with that, are you're dealing with constituents, both internal and your clients, that are extremely demanding, and rightly so. They're very significant financial implications and strategy at cost, and you're kind of supporting those decisions in terms of making a deal, not making a deal, on what terms, what value, etc. So that's number one. Number two, the pressures of time and that are quite significant. These are demanding jobs at all levels. As you move up the career, you're moving more and more towards marketing and supervising it, execution. You're traveling 4, 5, 6, 7 days a week sometimes. And it might seem exciting to have, lunches and breakfasts in different parts of the world with CEOs and the like, but they're also very demanding. So to make an impact and to be relevant with those constituents requires some kind of preparation and inspiration and a bit of luck as well. And then maybe the sort of third point, I guess, is that there's a lot of turnover in these jobs. They're very kind of demand-led, result-led. You need to generate the deals. A lot of the deals you work on don't materialize. So there's an element that's simply frustrating. It's almost like Sisyphus. You push the ball up and then the deals flop, or you get a deal, or you pitch a deal a lot and another bank gets it. They offer no silver medals. So unlike other parts of investment banking, where if you're raising a bond, there are 10 banks in a syndicate or an IPO. In M&A, it's often an exclusive advisor. You're either advising or you're not. So anyway, long story short, fascinating period of my life, very privileged, learned extraordinary, great exposure to all kinds of aspects, but like many things, not without its kind of quirks and pressures, for sure.
Thank you for sharing that, Roger. Now, a lot of people listen to these episodes, but a lot of people also watch them. And for people that are listening only, you have a nice Disruptive Futures Institute logo behind you. And you've mentioned this already. And I think at the time recording, you're heading for about 5 years since you sort of found, you're the founding chair of this. And as this sort of global think tank, can you maybe unpack Disruptive Futures a little bit more and tell us a little bit more about the work that's involved there?
Yeah, so the fundamental aspect is really the scope, I guess, which is what do we mean by disruptive futures? And effectively, we mean discontinuity. We mean that change is a constant. We mean that to assume that things will continue as they are or in a similar way is maybe dangerous to inform decision making from that. So our starting point is that change is a constant. Things are uncertain and unpredictable. Incidentally, and we can unpack that if you wish subsequently, that's not necessarily a negative, because it actually gives you a lot of agency. The opposite of things being would be that things are predetermined. So I actually don't think it's necessarily a negative, but it does require a particular type of sense making. What do you do when things are unpredictable, complex? What does that even mean? What does it look like? What frameworks can support you to inform decision making, to make sense of that world? And so the Disruptive Futures Institute has a remit, whether it's for individuals, or today we're slightly more focused on organizations and corporates, but fundamentally we're moving towards supporting the entire world in our own way, to appreciate what the nature of our world is, to appreciate how to make sense of that complex, unpredictable world, and to have tools to navigate through it, to make decisions, and even to create value and impact despite those characteristics. It's primarily educational. That includes books we write. I have a new, we have 4 big volumes called The Definitive Guide to Thriving on Disruption. I have a new book coming out, Disrupt with Impact, in September. We give executive education courses, and we record podcasts like with you, Simon, quite frequently. Articles. We have a full executive education program, workshops from Brazil to Asia to Canada, US. I was in Europe for most of June. And they cover topics of really underlying drivers of change. So we're not trying to kind of quote unquote bullshit bingo our way to the next trend or to the next type of AI. We're really looking at what are the fundamental drivers of change. Of course, that includes technologies, it includes AI, it includes climate, it includes societal, it includes many things. But we're not trying to be, the thickest, biggest trend report or what have you. We're really looking at things that are more fundamental, how they connect, what are the next order implications, and how to manage that.
Thank you, Roger. And was it a strategic decision to always have books as part of this journey? Because I think we're on book 5 now, if I'm right. And, a lot of sort of think tanks around the world, there's obviously papers and there's normally reports. And as you say, they get thicker each year and the covers get glossier. But was the writing of books always part of this strategy that you set out with?
I love the question, and you'll see why in a second. The books are kind of support of other ways of education, right? Videos and talks and executive programs and that. And I actually started off when I kind of left investment banking a few years back, thinking of writing just a kind of more conventional 200-pager or whatever on change and that. And that's when the pandemic hit. And so I got asked more and more, because of the topics I was focusing on, to give talks, and then to do half-day board strategy workshops, and then to give to do an executive program. And so my kind of book, little by little, became case studies and checklists and frameworks, and some were my own and some were building on the, the amazing work of others. And as I started putting that together, it became more of a system of educational content for the topics which I described earlier. And so I kind of got together with about 12 people, and in particular, an amazing girl called Lydia Zwin, a Brazilian journalist who's very involved in some of these topics and that. And I decided, you know what, instead of writing a kind of more conventional book, I'm actually going to write slightly arrogantly, but something called the Definitive Guide to Thriving on Disruption. They're 4 volumes. They're pretty substantive, at least in width and that. And they're meant to be kind of evergreen in terms of not getting too out of date. I mean, of course, things will change, but the fundamentals are evergreen. And the volume 1 is really how do we make sense of this complex, unpredictable world. Volume 2 is what are the frameworks and tools for this uncertain world. Volume 3 is Beta Your Life. What does it mean for you as an individual? It covers topics like education, transhumanism, all kinds of things, work and money. Volume 4, what does it mean for you as a business? So it's like what's happening, frameworks to deal with it, meaning for an individual, meaning for a business. And those are 4 volumes. And that basically is what I call the mothership, the system of content. And then we curate from that, we update it, because I also have my finger on the pulse with actual real world advisory work. It helps inform the executive education with real case studies and things that aren't out of date and that. And then the 5th book is kind of like, just because there's demand and it's a different factor. In a way, it's my first real, more conventional commercial trade book. The others are more sort of supporting the educational side of an institute. But none of them are meant to be kind of trend reports or whatever. They're meant to be, practical tools for the things we've described. And whether they're effective or not, you'll have to ask people who dived into them. But I would suggest they are, but that's the feedback we get. But hey.
No, I think it's a great approach, obviously. And the new book, it's due out in a short number of months, I think, at the time of recording today. And it's called Disrupt with Impact. And it isn't just about achieving success in this unpredictable world sort of framework, but you're also going to be diving into the frameworks here, aren't you, and building sort of confidence in plans that people have. Am I right in saying that, Roger?
Yeah, and one of the big areas I'm kind of trying to spend my time is to move from just the idea of being future prepared and being able to inform decision making and uncertainty, to also think about how do you drive transformational change in complex systems, whether that's a climate tech startup, whether it's your own life, whether it's society or whatever. And again, building on people have been focused on this for decades or years, as well as my own ideas. But there are some levers that are more effective for change. There's some that are harder but more effective. There's some that are ineffective. There's certain ways of doing things when you're dealing with complex systems, which is our society and world. And so the disrupt with impact is really that disrupt is not meant to be the Silicon Valley technocentric bullshit bingo thing, if I'm allowed to say that, if not, just beep it. But disrupt is really just meant to be that the status quo isn't working. There's too many challengers, whether it's climate, society, whatever it is, technology. The status quo is probably going to lead the world into a kind of dead end or worse. So you need change, whether it's to survive, whether it's to do things differently, whether it's to solve our complex challenges for society, whatever it is. And you want to do it with impact, because not because you shuffle paper or write checks or do whatever that is necessarily effective. So it's really, how do you future prepare, but in a way that can drive change in an effective way, as opposed to just change for the sake of change. And that's broader than just technology or the sort of more Silicon Valley centric, use of disruption. But that's probably the biggest contribution of the latest book, is that for the past year or two, I've been really spending a lot of time with organizations and research and work, just thinking about formalizing that aspect of driving change itself,
Yeah, I really appreciate that view. And I think driving impact in that sense, as opposed to the BS bingo card sense that we were referring to a moment ago, I think that's very, very powerful positioning. I heard an investor speaking recently who was referencing the AI being a little like refrigeration, and refrigeration was a great invention, but Coca-Cola built a fortune on the back of it by using refrigeration. And it's kind of as though, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this because everybody goes down the AI rabbit hole. Silicon Valley probably more than most, and everybody's baked in AI into everything they're doing to either raise money or sell product. But do you think we're moving to a situation where businesses are starting to think more about the impact that they're having, about the execution of how they build with some of these new tools, as opposed to just the sort of headlines that we're all reading, or is there still some education to be done here, Roger?
So I'm gonna have to take a few shortcuts given time. I mean, I don't mind, but just for the listeners and that. But this I'll give you one or two kind of snippets, and happy to expand if you wish. The first one is just to quote something I have in my latest book, which is AI seems to be the answer to everything, even though we're not quite sure what the question might be. Um, but no, I think the short answer is no. I think people don't really care much about. I mean, in terms of the organizations and the technology players, don't really care much about anything other than value creation, right? And you might argue that insofar as that's the kind of constitution today, with like it or not, you have shareholders, and the objective of the company is still to maximize value. So the reality is that for the one or two attempts to move towards stakeholder value and that, the reality is that in the end, none of that has kind of really been a kind of real lever or obligation or whatever to a large extent. So sadly, that's the case. The second thing I would say is that beyond the companies just focusing on value creation for AI, is I find that unfortunately a lot of the debate is focused on some important topics, but that shouldn't be limited to that. One, ethics and all that are absolutely phenomenally critical topics, so that's fine, and it should be the case. As to whether the discussions and the resolutions are kind of satisfaction or not is another matter. But a lot of the debate otherwise is kind of between a sort of broad dichotomy of utopia or dystopia, and the dystopia is existential risk, but as defined in a very specific manner of human extinction. And so once you're kind of going through these sort of false dichotomies and quite extreme, you're missing out a lot of the implications. And that's what we unpack quite heavily. I'll give you the sort of the 1 minute element on it, which I think is missing to the debate. What we call kind of tech essentialism, which is existentialism 2.0, which is what happens when humans no longer have exclusivity to decision making. What happens to your freedom, agency, and choice? That is an existential risk, even though it's not human extinction. And what happens to de-skilling when AI is moving up the decision-making value chain, where humans are less capable of understanding and processing complexity, where you're delegating decision-making to machines. And effectively, not only are machines learning more and humans stagnating, but we're declining. So it's even worse than the Ricardo effect in economics, in a sense. And that has ramifications on education, what it should be, on the future of humanity, on not to mention potential for mass unemployment. Don't get me wrong, we use disruption and change in a neutral manner. So it's not necessarily good or bad. It's not that AI is terrible or AI is good. I understand the miracles of medicine and other areas that can arise from technology. And the reality is that duality, those contradictions, tensions, and paradoxes cohabitate. You can use, I forget, it was one of the founders of Intel, right? Is a piece of metal good or bad, or steel good or bad? Or, if you make a weapon out of it, it's probably not good if you're using it. If you're making a knife to cut fruit or whatever, maybe it's not a bad thing. So, fundamentally, these things can be neutral, but obviously if the debates are the wrong debates, and if the development of them has limited safeguards and has one primary objective of value creation, for whom? For the shareholders, then clearly with things that are kind of quite substantive, like technology or AI, the ramifications are sort of beyond what we can kind of cover in this podcast. Although I'm happy to unpack further if you wish to, if you feel this time or what have you. But
I think we could talk for weeks on end, and we're definitely going to have to get you back to unpack some of these a little more. I don't want to run out of time, though, and I do want to ask you about your recent involvement at the Global Foresight Network. People may be unfamiliar with what that is, but I know you're in Geneva recently with the World Economic Forum. And that is, I know you spoke at that. And can you tell us a little bit about what the purpose of that is? And maybe just give us a little bit of insight to your experience there over the last number of days.
Yeah, so the initiative is really to sort of help with the levers of the organization, the World Economic Forum, and its kind of 50, 60 members of the Global Foresight Network, basically to have a multiplier effect to support future preparedness. At its simple core, that's what it is. The people attending included, academics, practitioners, organizations, from AstraZeneca to AXA and insurance to different organizations, as well as institutional or government. You have, countries that are very advanced in thinking about future preparedness from a policy and legislation perspective, like Finland, Singapore, who had this sort of foresight teams, but that kind of feed directly into the Prime Minister's office. You had people in the US who kind of brief the White House and the president and think about next 10, 20, 30 years, people head of foresight for the OECD or NATO and other organizations. So the interesting thing is that people had a different vantage point, but ultimately we were focusing on the same thing, which is foresight and future preparedness. I think the net is really a realization of the degree of deep unpredictability we live in. So whether it's at societal, individual level, organizations that are not really understanding that the nature of change is changing, that the asymmetries and nonlinearity has implications in terms of outcomes. It can also be for the good. We talked about many things like the UN Summit for the Future and some initiatives on climate, where you can have virtuous tipping points as well. But there are a lot of headwinds with negative risks. Some are existential, from climate to AI or nuclear. Human-made, so they're within our control, which in a way makes it more sort of sad in a sense. But fundamentally, it's really thinking about the multipliers we all have to reinforce future preparedness. Think about the importance of resiliency. Think about the importance of education, of justice. Different parts of the world are affected in different ways by some of these events. And the most important takeaway, which is again why we focus on the broad underlying drives of change and the unpredictability, is how things intersect and interact, and that creates further uncertainty. So you can't just look at individual risks or features or change in an isolated manner. They're self-reinforcing, and again, sometimes it's for the best and they're virtuous things. Often it isn't.
That makes a lot of sense, Roger. And I think that unpredictability that you're talking about there, the interesting is when you sort of look at that through the lens of creating impact in the sense that we were talking about earlier. And, people, businesses, governments, countries being ready to make the necessary changes. And also that maybe the leveling of the playing field, maybe on a global level, whether it comes to technology or AI, or whether it's lots of different things. It seems like there's an awful lot of change coming down the path rapidly anyway. So it is fascinating to get some insights from you about that Global Foresight Network. So thank you for sharing that. The next 6-12 months, you've obviously got the new book coming out, but you sit on, you're still involved in the VC world. You've obviously got the Disruptive Futures Institute. You're a busy man. What are you thinking about? What's on your mind right now when you look forward and you think about the next 6, 12, 24 months? What's on your roadmap? What's on your horizon? What's keeping you up at night, Roger?
So the good thing is that I'm quite aligned with what I feel is important for the world and which is motivating for me. So I'm not pretending to be, Mother Teresa or something I'm not, but I'm trying to find a balance where things I'm doing are motivating or interesting for me and potentially of relevance and impactful more broadly. While I do have different hats and things going on, they all quite self-reinforcing. So they focus ultimately on foresight, future preparedness, building resiliency. The We have a few initiatives specifically in climate for our Disruptive Futures Institute Sustainability and Climate Academy. I'm in Brazil for a few weeks in August. I'm on the board of the first Brazilian carbon credit certifier. The voluntary carbon market is something which is unfortunately a bit dysfunctional and problematic, but there are some actors that are doing very interesting things. So I'm spending time with a company in Brazil. We're trying to rethink the voluntary carbon market in our own way. The demand for some of the things we're doing is broadening beyond just corporates and organizations. So I've been extremely fortunate to be busy and scaling on the sort of business side, but I do see demand from individuals. So I'm looking forward, within the six 9 months to starting, cohort-based courses, which kind of be more access to individuals who might not be doing the executive education, probably launching some digital courses and kind of trying to move to sort of the consumer side as well. Partly because from a business perspective, it's also a big market in that, but also genuinely, I think these are topics that are important, and I've always tried to make them democratized and available through our work for whoever's interested in them. And then the final point maybe is that I'm trying to also think of different form factors to make it less painful than just, courses and books and that. So I've tried some improv and maybe stand-up comedy, and I know it's very difficult to do humor today, A, because it's difficult to be funny and that, and B, because in California you get arrested for anything that could remotely be funny just because of the way the world is going and sensitivities. But having said that, I do still believe in humanity and the ability to explore different ways of sharing different ideas, and that are kind of less binary than the more conventional approaches.
A true mixed media approach to things then, in every sense of the word. And finally, Roger, then, when you are talking about these topics, it's such a broad thing. We were never going to cover it in one episode, but is there anything that you want to maybe expand on, or maybe even something we haven't mentioned that you want to leave as maybe a parting thought for our worldwide listeners and viewers of this episode?
We touched upon it briefly, but I think ultimately the most important takeaway for me, and I just kind of think about it more and more, is really the importance of education. And that's the strongest lever, the most difficult one for building resiliency, relevancy. And within that, there's a subset around how you see the world and the assumptions you make about the world. Never assume. The idea that in Zen Buddhism and Eastern philosophy of Shoshin, beginner's mind, and I also use in innovation context, D-School or what have you. But I think that idea of constantly learning, relearning, unlearning, that idea of agency we have on our beingness, that idea that uncertainty is actually thanks to that things are not predetermined, and not assuming that things are linear, predictable, and controllable, but that it doesn't necessarily have to be scary if you have the right tools and mindset for that. I think the Western world doesn't do itself justice in putting itself in a box and perfectionism and what's right and wrong and avoiding mistakes and change. In Eastern philosophy, the idea of transience and change being a constant, a different kind of relationship with things, which I think can be helpful to manage times of change.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Thank you for adding that. Now, look, there's so much we haven't got to. We haven't really talked in depth about a lot of the boards that you sit on. There's the educational and faculty elements of what you do. And there's a lot going on, and as well in terms of your advice through your organization for AI and the how that comes together between humans and AI. But there's a lot going on. So I suppose last question is, if people want to actually find out more about all this great work that you're doing, Roger, where do we want to send people to? Is it a website? Is it your LinkedIn profile? Where's the best place for people to go to if they're watching or listening to this episode?
No, that's great. Thanks. So I think the best is probably just to follow Disruptive Futures Institute on LinkedIn, on the website, and not to kind of want to push books, but for those who find it relevant and want to have a a book. We do have the 4 guidebooks, and there's the new book, Disruptive Impact, which will be published in September, globally, initially in English. But I think for people who, if you follow the Disruptive Futures Institute, we're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn and various other things, you'll quickly find also podcasts and YouTube and other things if you're interested. And we do aspire to ramp up how much is available for free and democratized for those who want bite size and different forms. So that's probably the easiest.
Well, that's perfect. And that brings us nicely to the end of our discussion today here on the global discussion. So thanks to everybody who's been watching, listening to our discussions here today. Make sure that you follow, like, subscribe, do everything I need you to do to help support the show. And of course, go and check out everything that Roger's involved in. It really is a wealth of information. Check out those 4 volumes and, of course, the new book that's coming out. Go and grab a copy of that for sure. But Roger, thank you so much indeed for being on the show. I hope people join me again here for some more discussions with creatives and leaders and thinkers just like Roger. But thanks, Roger. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you today.
Likewise, Simon. Thanks for the exchanges and the richness of the topics.